Good afternoon, everyone. We'll wait about a minute or so while people are joining, coming back from the lunch break. Give people some time to join. If you'd like to drop a quick hello in the chat just to let us know that you're joining and people are starting to make their way into the presentation, that would be great. People are still making their way in. We'll give it another minute. Sound fine, Stuart?
Sounds perfect.
Okay. Stuart, sound about right to get started?
All right, sounds perfect. I'm
All
ready
right.
as long
Great.
as everyone else is ready.
Yes, sounds great. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back from the lunch break and to the Positive Outcomes with Emotion Regulation, the POWER program. We have Stuart Luther here today. He is a senior training and consultation specialist for the Rutgers CCSMHC. MH. He has a diverse background in supporting youth and schools as a regional youth development program director, a school-based clinician, and policy advocate. Stuart has extensive experience equipping schools with knowledge and practical strategies through training and coaching to implement school mental health evidence-based practices and programming. He specializes in service delivery and inclusion of LGBTQIA+ youth. Stuart also supports New Jersey youth and children in crisis as an intensive in-home counselor. So, Stuart, I'll turn it over to you. Welcome.
All right. Hello, everyone. So happy to be here with you all. I hope that so far today it's been a wonderful conference, and you've heard from some wonderful, engaging speakers around a lot of different topic areas. I hear that I have the wonderful spot of right after lunch. So if at any point you feel like you need to move around a little bit, just know I can't see you. So if you're standing, sitting, doing jumping jacks, I will have no idea. So get that energy up after lunch and we'll make it through this session together. I'm excited to be here with you all. And so now I'm going to actually turn it to you. You heard my bio and a little bit about me, which is always a little uncomfortable sitting here having someone read about you. But I want to hear about you. So if you want to just type in the chat what your name is, kind of what organization you're coming from, if you want to include what your role is, and if you're feeling really creative, I'm going to ask another prompt, which is if you were the weather, if your feelings were the weather today, how's the weather? Is it bright and sunny, partly cloudy? Do we have some thunderstorms going on? Maybe it's a little foggy. Go ahead and throw that in the chat just so that I know a little bit about who's here with me. I'll give you all a second to type those in. And again, just name, what organization you're with, if you want your role, and if the way you were feeling was the weather, what would it be? Partially sunny, Joni. Hi, Brenda. Very nice to meet you. The weather is sunny. I need some of that over here. I'm feeling sunny too, actually, today, but the weather outside is a little cloudy. All right, so go ahead and just keep typing those in. I'm eager to know who else is here. But let me jump into a little bit more about what we're going to be talking about today. So just really quickly, a quick agenda. We're going to start off talking about some overview of the Power program, but first we're going to jump into a little bit about some of the background and the reasoning of why the Power program was developed. Then we're going to talk about some of the theoretical background and frameworks for Power. Then we're going to go into really the meat of today's session, which are the resources that are available for Power, as well as what those group meeting sequences are going to look like. And then finally, we will kind of jump into implementation and progress monitoring, just thinking about how you can actually implement this in a school or otherwise, and talk about some practical, tangible things that you want to think about as you're working on that. And really quickly, I do have a QR code here that will link you to the Power Program website. And specifically, I think this QR code is going to take you to the interventions that, or the intervention materials that you can use. Just a really exciting first point here about the program is that it is totally free. It is completely open source, and I always say if it's free, it's for me. So everything that you'll need to implement the Power program is already available to you on the Power program website. And you can access that by the link in the chat or the QR code, or just typing in the Power program into Google, and it should be one of the top results. All right, so since the Power program is a group intervention for middle and high school, Brenda, thank you. I'm glad someone like that. If it's free, it's for me. So a quick discussion here. If you can type in the chat, what groups do you currently utilize or have you utilized in the past? Just so that we can kind of get a little bit of understanding of what the experience is with groups or facilitating groups or implementing those, whether in a school setting or outside of the school setting. What are some groups that you currently utilize? And some examples that come to mind are social skills groups are really popular, generalized kind of peer support groups. We can also think more about therapeutic groups. If there's any elementary folks in here, or maybe even older, lunch bunches are super popular. And if the response is, I don't run any groups and I never have, that's okay too. All right, Brenda's done some social skills groups. Yeah, so we commonly see those social skills groups especially popular when working with adolescents, and especially when working with adolescents in schools. And I would say anytime that I've shared this material and asked this question, predominantly we see over and over those social skills groups. Oh, and also been asked for a curriculum on empathy. Oh, that's really cool. Maybe I'll see if there's some ways that we can fit this into developing that empathy throughout the way here. So now that we are really well acquainted with one another, we're going to really just jump into the background of Power, and first starting off with why this program is really needed. So our first slide here is just really indicating much of what many of us probably know, and that is the youth and adolescents in our country and likely worldwide are really facing increased challenges across the board when it comes to attaining and sustaining a positive mental health and a positive overall well-being. And specifically, we know that about 1 in 5 children in the United States have some type of mental health challenge. And these challenges include both externalizing problems that we are those challenges that we can typically see, such as inattention, non-compliance, as well as those more internalized problems that we can't see as easily, like depression or anxiety. And then we also know that the COVID-19 pandemic really did exacerbate things. We know it certainly didn't help. But also we were seeing these trends starting to increase for youth and adolescents even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. So now I'm going to turn it to you. What are some things that you're noticing with the folks that you're working with, whether it's adults, children, adolescents? What are some trends that you're noticing? And I'll start off with one because I do still work with a number of different schools as well as support individuals privately. And one thing that I know, especially in the school setting, that has become a real challenge is anxiety, especially with that anxiety resulting in school avoidance or school refusal. There's many of our schools across the nation are really experiencing challenges with chronic absenteeism. And what about you? You can feel free to drop that in the chat. And again, the question here that you can drop into the chat is, what are some trends you're noticing in the field as it relates to student mental health? Oh, more behavior issues, trouble with conflict resolution. Absolutely. Um, that's definitely something that I feel like I'm hearing a lot from schools on, is there isn't oftentimes an increase in those behavioral challenges or those externalizing challenges, as well as those kind of social skills, and even more specifically, that conflict resolution. And working through those social challenges in person versus as online, right? Yes, issues on social media pouring into school conflict. Absolutely. This happens, it seems like almost every day. We're seeing also some increases in bullying and utilizing social media to um, either kind of create that bullying situation, or maybe it's even happening on online. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about the challenges that we're seeing in school mental health. So traditionally, school-based mental health services are often provided in response to observable behavioral issues or crises within the school environment. However, contemporary approaches really recognize the importance of addressing mental health needs before they escalate into more serious problems, i.e., a more preventative focus rather than that reactive focus. So when we talk about that traditional focus, tends to be more reactive and really focuses on addressing mental health issues after they've already manifested, either as behavioral challenges or crises in the school. And these services are really typically provided in response to specific incidents. So disruptive behaviors, conflicts, like you mentioned, Brenda, or even those kind of emotional outbursts. However, as we kind of shift more into thinking about contemporary approaches, we see more prevention as a focus, as well as including some of that reaction as well. So contemporary approaches emphasize that early identification and intervention to prevent the development of more serious mental health issues or crises. These mental health services are really integrated into the school environment as a proactive strategy. And the schools implement these strategies to really create a supportive and nurturing environment that addresses the social emotional needs of all students. And we can acknowledge that all of our students are going to have a different type and a different level of needs. Some are going to be more intensive than others. And by addressing mental health needs proactively and through that development of a more comprehensive school mental health system, schools can really help students acquire the skills of resilience that are necessary for both personal well-being and that academic success. And because schools are the most common setting in which students receive mental health supports, and that is a true data point, schools must provide services in an extremely efficient and effective way. So what does this mean? This means that we're delivering services that are matched to the intensity of the student's needs, and that we're utilizing a multi-tiered system of support that offers means for schools to do this. So within this framework, and you've got the triangle here, it seems like in the mental health world, we really love triangles. So here's another one for you. And what you'll notice here is we have tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So within this framework, tier 1 supports are really provided to all students to promote their social, emotional, and behavioral well-being. So when you think of this, a few buzzwords might come to mind, right? Social, emotional learning, character education, restorative practices, any positive behavior supports, right? So anything that is really enhancing the school climate and culture or promoting those social, emotional, and behavioral skills of all of our students. And then we get to tier 2, which is where power is really nested within. So tier 2 supports are provided to some students. As you can see here, we have um, some of those targeted students that really need those additional supports. So we think of students that need tier 2 in two different ways. They can also converge though. So one is our students that are at risk or are already beginning to experience mental health needs, or they really are not positioned well to develop the skills that those emotional, behavioral, social skills that we're trying to support at tier 1. Whatever we're doing at tier 1 isn't necessarily working for them. So they need more targeted interventions that really seek to address the risk factors and promote protective factors. And these interventions are commonly delivered in those small groups or individualized, really brief, and I mean really brief settings. Thinking here about mentorship programs or check in, check out if you're familiar with that. And then tier 3, we're not really going to be talking about this much today, but this is when you get into treatment. This tier 3 generally is reactive in focus because these students already have what could likely be a mental health diagnosis and need those more intensive supports of individual support. So jumping a little bit deeper into tier 2, the interventions at tier 2 are different from tier 1 in a few different ways. So tier 2 really includes standardized routines and practices, as well as they don't include all students, right? So they include the minority of students, but these students should really be able to quickly begin tier 2 interventions to receive those additional supports. Because keep in mind at tier 2, we're still thinking about prevention, where our goal is to prevent a severe need from occurring. So we're trying to catch these students early and connect them with a brief, low intensity, but targeted intervention as quickly as possible so that we can catch it before those needs increase. And because tier 2 interventions are still serving an estimated around, 10 to 15 to 20% of students, we really need these interventions to be feasible for implementation with fairly low effort and require resources that can be obtained really for a number of students expected to participate. So 20% is still a large percentage of your students. So what that means is we need to make sure that we have the resources and that the interventions that we're providing don't need as much resources as you might at tier 3 because it's all about effectiveness without sacrificing that efficiency. Tier 2 interventions are also designed to promote additional opportunities for students to develop skills. It also offers students more structure and predictability and provides students with additional contingent feedback and or that support students in self-management of their daily activities and their behaviors. So you can kind of almost think of this as like tier 1 plus, right? We are creating that more targeted environment with more supports for those students that need just a little bit more help obtaining the skills and having their needs met than the general population of our students who are doing just fine with just receiving those tier 1 supports. So let's think a little bit about the gaps in available programs for tier 2. So there are different programs available that can be used to really promote students' mental health in these tiers of service delivery within school. Generally speaking, there are a few interventions that are designed to be implemented in schools at the tier 2 level. So we're already starting across the board for all schools. There's a really limited number of evidence-based tier 2 interventions that schools are able to adopt. And in addition to that, most interventions that are developed for those younger population, right? So that primary or elementary school students, with really few evidence-based interventions designed specifically for middle school and high school populations. And then finally, there are very few available programs that take a transdiagnostic approach. So kind of keep that, another buzzword, transdiagnostic, keep that in mind as we kind of go through these next 3 slides. And what that transdiagnostic approach does is it recognizes that various mental health disorders often co-occur or occur together. So they also share a small set of risk factors that are the same, as well as underlying processes, and are really commonly addressed through treatment approaches with overlapping elements and strategies. So the transdiagnostic intervention addresses those common risk factors, as well as those underlying processes, to be applicable and supportive of a range of mental health disorders. So what we're saying here is we a transdiagnostic approach allows one intervention to be applicable for multiple types of challenges. And what you'll see a little bit later is this can include both externalized and internalized challenges. So let's think about the reality of practice that we see today, right? And how tier 2 interventions are provided, or what's the environment is in schools, and also honestly outside of schools in those community health settings as well. So we know practitioners' caseloads are high and really varied, which really limits their ability to learn and apply with fidelity the various focal treatment approaches. And youth often present with co-occurring problems, right? As do many adults. They have multiple challenges that they need support with addressing. And as well as having those symptoms that fluctuate, right? They make it difficult to really determine which problems need the most attention. And that creates a challenge in how are we prioritizing these services and supports. So now thinking about the transdiagnostic alternative, why is this helpful when we're thinking about all of these challenges and the reality of practice? So what we're doing is really applying that same underlying treatment principles across a range of disorders. We've identified that the processes and risk factors and challenges can be spread across a range of disorders or a range of types of challenges. And those treatment protocols are not tailored to a specific diagnosis within that transdiagnostic alternative. And then finally, it really uses a single protocol to address multiple problem types. So talk about creating efficiency. If we're using one intervention to support multiple different types of challenges. And what we argue here is that there's really 2 primary categories of benefits to adopting a transdiagnostic approach to school-based mental health delivery. So first, we really argue that if you boil down students' unique profiles and presentations down to understanding the core dysfunctions, elements, or principles, you'll be able to intentionally and selectively choose fewer transdiagnostic interventions that can address the variety of needs as opposed to a larger array of diagnoses or disorder-specific interventions that address narrow targets. So let me say this in layman's terms. So we have multiple types of challenges or diagnoses or dysfunction, right? What a transdiagnostic approach allows is to have one type of intervention that can spread across supporting all of those challenges, where what we see commonly now is individual types of interventions or supports that are chosen for each of those different problem types. So you have an intervention for anxiety, you have an intervention for depression, you have an intervention for anger or other externalizing or behavioral challenges. The transdiagnostic approach simplifies that a little bit by offering a intervention that can support all of those. So that means me as a provider or as a school mental health staff person, I don't need to learn about all of these different types of interventions. I can really focus my time with one or a few types of interventions that can provide supports across the spectrum of disorders or challenges that my students or clients are experiencing. And the second is because you've selected and are implementing fewer interventions. Like I said, there's going to be that less upfront training need for implementers, less preparation needed, less support needed for that implementation, less differentiation in regards to assessment and monitoring practices, right? So it really simplifies all of these different layers that go into implementing an intervention, and specifically here, implementing a group intervention. Because as we know, it's not just show up, the students are there, and you provide the intervention. There's layers to this that take a lot of time and preparation. So if we can have one intervention that supports that, we're better off. So what does the research say about this, though? So, in a meta-analysis by Clifford and his colleagues, really identify 4 primary targets of transdiagnostic interventions in schools. And these are those core targets for these transdiagnostic interventions to be successful. So they've identified emotion regulation, or one's self-control of their emotions, distress tolerance, or the ability to cope with negative emotions, adaptive thinking, as well as social skills. So where does that bring us? But the POWER program, because all of that is packaged into one and what is the POWER program? So POWER stands for positive outcomes with emotion regulation. The POWER program is a group-based intervention that really focuses on promoting students' emotion regulation skills as well as their strategies. And there are 7 core 35 to 45-minute group meetings, and it's designed for middle and high school students with or at risk of developing mental or behavioral health needs. And this includes both internalizing and externalizing needs. So the power group meetings can be facilitated by any school-based professional who has the comfort and skills related to facilitating small group instruction. There is no specialized training in mental health or behavioral health that is required for implementers of the power program group meetings. And on that point, we are able to do that because the power program, as typically all tier 2 group interventions should be, this is a skills development group. And I say that to differentiate it from a therapeutic group. This group is really intended to focus on skills development across that sequence of 7 sessions. All right, and just really quickly, if anyone has any questions throughout here, feel free to drop those in the chat or the Q&A. So now, as we dig a little bit deeper into the POWER program, getting to know a little bit more about this as we move through, the POWER program and those 7-week sequence of meetings include 3 different intervention techniques. And these may, or they likely do, look pretty familiar to many, if not all of you. So first, we have motivational interviewing. And I believe earlier today, there was even a session that focused around motivational interviewing. So concepts from motivational interviewing is incorporated into the POWER program. And this piece is really emphasized in the beginning as well as the end of the group meeting series. And motivational interviewing is that approach of just facilitating that change-focused conversation that uses specific verbal, conversational, and interpersonal strategies to really create that motivation for change. And it uses those strategies such as engaging, focusing, evoking, and planning to really strengthen an individual's decision and commitment to making that change in their life. So what does this look like in the POWER program? So you can see here, this arrow kind of guides us through each of the steps in which motivational interviewing is used and what the students will kind of go through. We really start off with allowing them to identify their own goal, kind of prompting them and gauging how motivated they are currently towards completing that goal, how confident they are in completing that goal, and then really starting to get that change focused thinking going by having them imagine what their life would be like if they met this goal, if they made this change that we're talking about throughout these meeting sequences. And then, of course, we allow them opportunity to monitor their progress and evaluate their goal or their success towards that goal. And then we have our behavioral skills training as a main component of the program. And this piece really puts that behavioral and cognitive behavioral intervention and is really emphasized in the middle of the group meeting series. But as you'll notice, it really kind of is incorporated throughout. So you have a string of those behavioral skills either being taught or practiced throughout almost the entirety of those 7 weeks. And behavioral skills training This is that approach that through which specific, discrete behavioral skills are taught through that instructional hierarchy that includes 4 steps that you see here on the screen. So first is that instruction. So I'm going to guide you and show you what this new skill is. The second is modeling. So first is instruction. I'm telling you about this skill, the importance, why it's helpful. Second step is really modeling or demonstrating the skill in use. So I'm going to show you how to do this. And then that third step is practice. We're now all going to practice this together. And then that final step is providing that feedback to each individual or the group as a whole so that they can incorporate that feedback into their practice of the skill in the future. So we use this to provide training on a few different behavioral skills, but these are really focused around that behavioral relaxation or that behavioral activation. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But just for those of you that might be a little bit more acquainted to this type of style, which is absolutely what we incorporate here, but more of this language, we really do incorporate and utilize that I do, we do, you do method of behavioral skills training with that feedback provided throughout. And the third major category of intervention techniques is cognitive instruction, diffusion, and restructuring. So this piece puts that cognitive in cognitive behavioral intervention and is emphasized in the second half of the group meeting series. And this instruction is provided through the program to really help students identify how their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are all related. We have another triangle here that shows that. But the students learn how to observe their thoughts and change their relationships with those thoughts. And this strategy is related to the diffusion technique of acceptance and commitment therapy for those of you that are aware of that modality. And students also learn how to observe, evaluate, and change their thoughts. And this strategy is more related to that cognitive restructuring technique of CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. And finally, students learn the overarching strategy of catch, check, choose, which is a strategy in which students really catch their thought. They check whether it is a realistic thought or a helpful thought. And then they choose whether they want to just let this thought go or actually change that thought into one that is more realistic or more helpful. So those are our 3 modalities. We have, again, our motivational interviewing, behavioral skills, and then those cognitive skills. And again, how does this all come together? As you can see here, we have our first group meeting, which really focuses around establishing those group dynamics, just like any type of group would. And then we utilize a lot of those motivational interviewing components towards the beginning there as well, having them set their goal and thinking about that immediately and assessing that motivation for change. Group meeting 2 is recognizing and labeling emotions. First, we want to make sure that our students really have the skills to understand emotions, which it may be a surprise to some of you, those of you that work in schools or frequently work with youth. It may not be a surprise, but a lot of youth really have challenging being able to identify and understand their own emotions. So we start off with our kind of skills training with just understanding and identifying emotions that they're experiencing. And then once they've identified and better understand feelings or emotions, they will set an emotional goal for an emotional goal that they want to increase, as well as an emotional goal for a feeling that they want to decrease. And that will kind of guide their work through the remainder of those sequence. And then group meeting 3 is really focused around those behavioral skills. So that's where we'll learn behavioral skills of relaxation. We'll do mindful breathing, a number of other different mindfulness strategies to promote that relaxation. Because as we know, some of our students, their goal is going to be to bring some of the energy of those emotions down. So prompting that relaxation, thinking here about anger or anxiety. But sometimes we really want to invigorate ourselves and utilize that behavioral activation or doing things that we really enjoy or that give us energy. And that's going to be mostly useful for those that are seeking to increase emotions or decrease those more depressive feelings and increase those more energetic happiness or content feelings. And then next on to group meeting 4. This is when we kind of start to get into those more cognitive strategies. But keep in mind, every single one of these meetings, we're going to continue to practice those behavioral strategies, those relaxation exercises. And then in group meeting 4, we're really going to focus around understanding and observing thoughts. There's a number of different exercises and activities that allow them to engage with one another and identify those thoughts and feelings that they're having. And then we'll start to talk about that diffusion technique, right? So identifying if a thought is really helpful and if it's not working to kind of modify. And then we have behavioral activation that we'll continue to utilize as well. And then in group meeting 5 and 6, so you'll notice that this is combined here, meetings 5 and 6, and that's because Catch Check chooses the most advanced skill that they'll learn throughout this process. So we wanted to make sure that there was enough opportunity to practice the skill with support. And so again, this is that observing, identifying, and changing thoughts, as well as again utilizing behavioral activation as well. And then group meeting 7 is our kind of conclusion, the final group session in which we have some activities incorporated to work through and review all of the information that was provided over the last 7 weeks. There's some games that are incorporated where they practice those skills. They have to show those skills really to hone in and make sure that they're leaving these sessions with a review and feeling confident about implementing these outside of the sessions. And that's the sequence. I wish we had more time today to go in more detail of this, but if you go to the Power Program website, we have videos that guide you and train you to facilitate each of these specific group meetings. And the implementation guide that's in our intervention materials, it has scripts word for word and what you can say and utilize those scripts throughout those meeting sequences. So it's really comprehensive and really focuses on making sure that you have more than enough information to be able to provide then this information to your students as well. All right, and we'll talk more about those different material components now so that you are well acquainted with the different types of resources as you're implementing this and how you can use each one of these. So there's 4 main materials that you'll want to make sure that you have accessible when you are implementing the Power Program. So first is that implementation manual that I mentioned already. And you'll notice here we've got a few screenshots of what that looks like. And this is going to be essentially your Power Program Bible. It's a ton of pages, but I guarantee that you will probably use every single one of them. And the reason that it's so many pages is because it's so comprehensive, because we wanted to design this so that anyone could pick up this implementation manual and provide or facilitate a group session. So each session will include a summary or a meeting at a glance that outlines what the objectives are of each weekly meeting, the materials that you'll need, as well as the agenda for that meeting sequence. And then you'll notice here to the right, this is an example of what the contents of each group session will look like within the implementation manual. You'll notice that it has some directives for the facilitator. So before students arrive, on a note card, write 2 truths, 1 lie, right? So it's guiding you on exactly what you should be doing. And then it even has a sample script that you can utilize. And really that's for the comfort level of whoever the facilitator is. And then you would just work through each of those for each group, and it has all of the information that you'll need right in there, as well as some example prompts or follow-up questions for students in particular situations. And then we have our student book, and the student book is used by the students, of course, throughout the group meetings and is intended to provide those opportunities for active engagement and self-reflection. So this contains all of the worksheets, reflection prompts, visuals to really support the meeting activities. So every student that is participating in the group will receive a student book. I would recommend that you have them write their name on it and then take those back after each meeting until the final meeting, and then they take them home. because we know what often happens when something is shoved into a middle schooler or a high schooler's backpack, and into the abyss, never to return. And we definitely don't want to lose those, because it does include an opportunity for the students to monitor their progress towards their goals, as well as everything that they'll need for those meetings. So you don't need necessarily any projectors, any computer setup. Everything that the students will need throughout the process is a part of this student book. The next thing is the challenge book. And the challenge book is the collection of worksheets and visuals designed to accompany the weekly challenges or the independent practice activities that students are assigned at the end of each meeting. We very intentionally do not call this homework, but it's homework, right? But these challenges are really giving students the opportunity and prompting them to practice skills specifically outside of each of the weekly meetings. So they'll leave each weekly meeting with their challenge, and they will be tasked with completing that throughout the week. And then the very first thing of each meeting is to review what that challenge was. So we're kind of following up. And if students don't do it, they don't get out of it, right? So we prompt them to complete it in the session if they didn't complete it throughout the week. And then next we have our adult handout, and this is a really handy resource for anyone really that you're wanting to share very briefly some information about the POWER program. This can be also a support for any of the adults that are in the student participants' lives. So parents, guardians, caregivers, educators, other school-based professionals. It really provides an outline of what the program is, but it also outlines, as you can see on the right, how adults can really support those students that are participating. And it even breaks that down week by week and gives some examples of things that you can do in helping the students with attaining those skills outside of the group sessions. Because if anyone knows or has facilitated a group before, you have pretty limited control over what the students are going to be doing outside of the group sessions. So it can be really helpful to have the other trusted adults in the students' lives also supporting them throughout this process. And just really briefly, the group meetings sequence or the actual agenda is, are we at 10 minutes, Joni? Okay, thank you. We're gonna get through all this, don't worry. So the final, each meeting follows this really specific agenda process. So we start off with our welcome. We always review group expectations and review the agenda. We do an icebreaker or we review last week's challenge, right? So we're always holding our students accountable for completing that week's challenge. And then we have a guided practice of those relaxation strategies, whichever one is specifically chosen for that week. And then you start to get into the content of each session. And it always includes an introduction, that more psychoeducational aspect, providing some instruction on what the skill is and what is important about it. And then we have guided practice and that individual practice and reflection. And then we wrap up. Here's your new challenge for this week, and I'll see you next week. So that's the style that you'll notice as you start to look through the implementation manual. All the agendas follow for each sequence. So it's really helpful for you as a facilitator, but also really helpful for the students because they're going to learn to know what to expect when they walk into that room. That will also help decrease some of that anxiety or fear that students are having when they are going to those group sessions. They're really going to have their expectations set right out from the front. And you can even tell them each of these meetings is going to look the same. There's going to be different content, but it's going to be the same. So as we have about 10 minutes left here, well, 6 minutes here, just a couple of things, and I'll check in with staff to see if this is something that can be shared, the PowerPoint presentation, because I do have some additional slides in here that might be helpful for you, but we just don't have time to get to. But thinking about implementation, one specific thing that I want to make sure that we mention as far as implementation is identifying students, because we want to make sure that we're identifying students that are a good fit that are going to receive the benefits from this program. So we want to look for students that show or report those difficulties with emotion regulation or regulating emotions in relation to those internalizing or externalized mental health problems. it's not necessarily a good fit for students with intellectual or developmental disabilities, or severe signs of internalizing concerns that really may be addressed through more individualized supports. And we also want to avoid adding students who may be violent or have extremely aggressive behaviors. And that's pretty much for any type of group. But I do want to make sure I mention a specific point related to the students with severe intellectual and developmental disabilities. So this is really just because there are those cognitive skills that are utilized throughout this process. And we want to make sure that our students that are being put into these groups or referred to these groups have the cognitive functioning to be able to adopt those skills. So that's really all the point that's trying to be made here, is that we want to make sure that we are providing students with supports that fit their specific types of needs. And
Stuart, there is
also,
a question. I'm sorry, there is a
okay.
question here in the chat. I don't know if you want to address it now or wait until you're finished with this point.
Yeah, no, let's ask it. I would rather
It
get
was
the
from
question first.
Brenda. Would the program still be effective if the sessions are shortened or broken up into 14 sessions? I've had school districts tell me they don't have time in the schedule to implement interventions, and I'm trying to meet them where they are.
Hmm.
Good, great, excellent question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Brenda. And that is one of the main challenges that Power Program tries to address with these really brief sessions. I would say I've never split it up across 14 sessions. I think that you will have trouble shortening them. But if you did want to break them up, I think that would be your better option here. Um, as far as thinking of some other creative ways that maybe you can take to schools that I've used in the past, one is I've done it during lunch. Students, some students love it, some students hate it, right? And we can accommodate that within the lunch period. You do really have to plan for that time for students to get their lunch, get in, get settled. So what I've seen is it's a little beneficial to check in with their teachers that they have right after lunch and say, is it okay if they miss just the first 10 minutes? And that's usually you get a better response from that and over saying, can I take them out for the full period? Another strategy that I've used in the past, especially with middle and high school, is kind of staggering the meeting times, right? So having the first session in block 1 or period 1. The next week you have it in block 2 or period 2. The third week you have it in block 3, and so on and so forth, right? So that way, throughout the duration of the program, the students are only missing one class one time, one or two times at the most, right? And then otherwise, depending on where you're implementing this, Brenda, if you know that health phys ed time sometimes is a little bit easier to get some release as well. So those are some options. If you do split it into 14 sessions, I would love to hear about how that goes. I do think that there might be some natural breaks in there that you could split it up. But I wouldn't say it's impossible. I would say that it might be a little challenging, but I totally hear the challenge that you're experiencing with implementing this in schools. Um, so with that, and that was actually one of my last implementation tips that I was going to talk about. So let me just see. I'll go to questions now to see if anyone else has any other questions that you'd like me to address, whether about the content, whether it's questions about just experience implementing groups in schools.
While people are considering their questions, I'm going to put in the chat the way that
Oh, Joni, I think you got
I
muted.
know. You know what? That happened when I hit enter for some reason. I'm going to put in the chat some of the ways that you can access the resources and the PowerPoint presentation and recordings after this session. I'm also going to, when Stuart is finished and you're all finished with your questions, put the link to today's survey for Stuart's session in the chat as well.
And one
But
final
please, if
note.
you have questions,
Yes, yeah, and please make sure to fill out all of that. And just if you need my information, you can always find it at the Power Program website. It's my email that's listed there. So if you are looking through the materials and you have any questions or you need any ideas about implementing in your school or otherwise, always feel free to reach out. I'm happy to jump on a quick call or respond to an email with some best practices as the way that I've utilized this program and I know that others have utilized it. So please feel free to reach out. And yeah, absolutely. Oh, so, and one other thing here is the slides. Joni, do we know if we'll be able to share out the slides?
Yes, in one of the chat responses I just put up, there is you can go to our website. So all the session recordings, presenter slides, and certificates of completion will be posted on our conference website, listed here in the chat. HTTPS MHTTC Wellbeing Conference vfairs.com. You'll get the full listing there in the chat. So everything will be accessible through our conference website. So please bookmark that web address and you'll have all the information that you'll need from Stuart's session as well as other sessions from today. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Stuart, any final thoughts? We have the next session starting at 2:05, so you have about a 10-minute break. So hopefully we'll see everyone at around 2:05. Thank you again, Stuart.
Yeah,
Wonderful
thank you.
information.
Thank you. Thank you. And I hope you all have a good rest of the conference and the good rest of your day.